The following program is made possible by the generous support of these sponsors. United Bank, with full-service banking for our community and our veterans from convenient locations. By PGBA, the healthcare claims processor for the American Armed Forces, serving those who serve us. And by Conway Ford, dedicated to serving our communities and our veterans in Horry, Georgetown, and Marion counties. From the campus of Coastal Carolina University, the Center for Military and Veteran Studies is pleased to present Military Memoirs. Hello and welcome to Military Memoirs. I'm Rod Gragg, and our guest on the program today is Mr. Roland Morin, who served in the United States Army National Guard and the U.S. Air Force National Guard most of his time as a radar operator at missile sites during the Cold War. Pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
You were telling me earlier you grew up in Woonsocket, Rhode Island.
That's
right?
Correct.
In the 1940s, early 50s. Can you tell me something about your family?
Well, I'm one of 7 children. I'm the oldest.
So you're the oldest of 7
Yes.
children growing up in the 40s and the 50s in
Correct.
Rhode Island. Big family. That was a lot of responsibility for the oldest, wasn't it?
Well, yes, but we all had our chores, and everybody, had to work together in order to make it go.
Well, big families require that,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So what kind of chores would you have had as a kid? That's the oldest of 7.
We heated basically with wood and with coal. So the chores were, we'd have to keep the firewood, bring in the firewood and keep things going that way. We had chores assigned to us. Somebody, after the meals, somebody would do the dishes and.
Right. So, especially a large family, but back in those days, even in small families, I guess, kids were expected to know how to work.
Yes.
So you had to pull your weight and do your chores.
Exactly.
And what did your dad do?
My dad was in textiles. He worked in textiles, I would have to say, at least 40 years. He was in there for a long time.
Well, a lot of textiles in New England.
Yes.
Right. Now, I know your mom worked at home. I mean, she worked
Yes.
at home if she had 7 children. Did she work outside the home?
Yes, she did. She worked in textiles also for quite a while.
Wow. So she worked in textile industry, and then she was also at home
Yes.
with 7 kids. Yeah. So you went to school there in Rhode Island.
Yes.
And got out and presumably got a job.
Yes.
Or did you start working earlier?
I started working early. I started working at age 13.
Okay, so that would have made you about the 8th grade or 9th
Yeah,
grade, something
somewhere
like
in
that?
there, yeah.
What kind of work did you do as an 8th grader?
I started washing dishes in the hospital.
So you do that after school?
Yep.
Okay, nobody accused you of being lazy, right?
That's for sure.
No. So, so you did that, and you got out of school and took a job somewhere.
Yeah, I started working for a jewelry company. Was polishing jewelry.
So how did you decide to go into the Army National Guard?
Well, it was doing the draft, and my mother did not want me to get drafted, so she talked me into going into the Guard.
Okay, this would have been about the mid-1950s, I guess.
Yes.
So the Cold War is really going strong.
That's correct.
And there's real concern that the Soviet Union might someday launch some kind of surprise attack on us, the way the Japanese did in World War II. And so there's this buildup on both sides of weaponry and atomic weapons, nuclear weapons, and it was kind of a tense time, wasn't it?
It sure was.
So your mom didn't want you to be a ground soldier somewhere, and so she encouraged you to join the Guard, which is weekend duty in less the Guard is activated.
Correct.
Right. So so you did that. When did you join the Guard?
Oh, 1956, 57, in that area.
All right. So you just went in and enlisted.
Yes.
All right, and then you had to do basic training.
Basic training in Fort Dix, New Jersey.
And what was that like?
It was rough. Even as I was probably 18, 19 years old. It was still rough training, but I liked it. I did like it.
The challenge?
Yes, very good.
Okay. So in the Guard, I presume then as now, so you do your basic, and then you're assigned a duty somewhere, and you hold your regular, normal civilian job, but on weekends you're in the National Guard training, preparing, doing your work.
Yes.
Is that how it worked?
Correct.
Okay. So how did you make that transition? Once you were there, were you satisfied with that?
No, not really, because I was working, like I said, in a jewelry plant, but to be truthful with you, I was making really good money at that time for that in that industry, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. So in 59, these jobs came up. They told us that these jobs were coming up on the missile sites, and anybody who belonged in the Guard would have the option of applying for the job.
Now this was still in Rhode Island.
This was still in Rhode Island.
All right, and so you were in the Army National Guard, and you had the opportunity to work in a missile battery, at a missile base.
Yes.
Now, would this still be the weekend guard duties?
No, this then became a full-time job.
Okay, so full-time job with the National Guard, and what was your position working with these missiles?
I was a radar operator.
All right, and so there were missile bases at that time really all over the country.
Correct.
Right? More than 200 in different places.
Yes.
Now, these were not the later intercontinental ballistic missiles, the big.
No, these were not the ICBM missiles.
All right, so these were for air defense.
Air defense.
So if in the 50s, primary enemy, let's say the Soviet Union, decided to launch an attack, they would come in with waves of bombers.
Correct.
Right? And so we needed, it was felt, missile bases around the country, and in Hawaii and Alaska, the territories at the time, to have a defense against the potential Soviet air threat.
Correct.
Okay. And I think the Soviets at that time had this bomber, long-range bomber they called a Tupolev, like a Tu-4, and then different models of it that basically came from our B-29 Super Fortress. And in World War II, when the Soviet Union was an ally, we had some emergency landings. The Soviets had wanted the bombers, but our government wouldn't let them have them. But when some went down for emergencies in Soviet territory, they kept them and then copied them and built their own generation of all these bombers. So we were worried as a nation that there would someday be coming from the pole over Canada, or coming from Alaska or Europe or someplace, there would be this mass attack of Soviet bombers. We had some kind of defense against that, correct?
Correct.
And that's what you were doing.
Yes.
So what kind of missile was in the base there in Rhode Island where you worked?
Well, the first missile, Nike site that I was on, it was an Ajax missile, which was, the range wasn't too great.
Yeah, it had a range of about 25 miles.
Correct.
So this was really close-up defense once the enemy got near our shores.
Yes.
But it had I was looking, it had a speed of 1,500 miles per hour.
That's correct.
So, I mean, that would cover 25 miles in a hurry, right?
Yes.
Now, and the remarkable thing here is, to me, we always think about missile defenses as being largely Air Force, and the Navy has missiles as well. But this was an Army operation, right?
Correct.
So you were Army National Guard, and this was an Army missile post.
Yes.
Right. So
I just didn't realize, I didn't think about that. The Army had control of missiles and the air defense system, which you would primarily think would be Air Force. And eventually the two service branches kind of got into competition, and then the Air Force won, right?
Correct.
So eventually that would transition to the Air Force, but when you're in it, it was still Army.
It was still Army.
Right. And this Ajax, this missile, was that what had been an artillery battery at one time?
No, that Ajax missile was a missile site that was, the Army originally had it, and it was turned over to the National Guard.
Okay, so the National Guard now is running the air defense system for the northeast shore of the United States.
Yes.
Okay. Now, what were your duties as a radar operator?
It's basically running radars. You'd be tracking targets, running different missions.
So if you're a radar operator in those days and with the Army National Guard, when you're on duty, you're just kind of scanning to see if there's anything out there that shouldn't be out there.
Correct.
Did you ever occasionally see things that, at least for a while, you didn't know what they were?
You didn't know whether that was common. That was common. The acquisition radars would pick them up, and we'd have to identify what they had. They had on the planes. They have I forget what they call them now, but they're detectors, and if they weren't squawking the right code, you start getting suspicious.
Well, did you ever have any times where things got a little worrisome or tense?
Oh yes, that was really common.
Oh, can you think of maybe an example of be like a civilian aircraft that would be coming in and it didn't identify itself or something, or?
That happened a few times, but if they didn't identify themselves, then the Air Force would scramble aircraft to go up and do a visual identification.
So that happened sometimes on your watch?
Yes.
All right. So was there ever a moment where you wondered if this really was the real thing?
Oh, whenever they scrambled somebody, you thought it was the real thing.
Well, in that era, 50s up to 60s, the tensions between the Soviet Union and NATO and the United States, they were real.
Yes.
And there was real concern that at any day there really could be an attack on the United States.
Correct.
So when you went to work, that's something you had to take really seriously.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you were going there to do a job. Basically, it was personal survival. If they came and attacked, especially at these sites, this is the sites that they would try and put out first, so they wouldn't get.
So this is really the first line of defense.
Correct.
For the United States
yes.
in those days. So a lot of responsibility for a young man to be calling the shots, sort of.
Well, there was people above us that were calling the shots, but we were told what to do, and we had a job to do, and we did it.
Right. But did you ever walk out of there and kind of think about the worst case scenario?
Not really.
So it's really just duty.
Yes.
You just did your job and it became routine.
Correct.
So it would seem that would be difficult, though, when you're sitting there looking at radar and here's something coming in and you don't know what it is and it's not acting right, and you realize that if it's the wrong thing, a lot of lives could be at stake.
That's correct. That's correct.
So how did you deal with that kind of responsibility?
Well, after a while, you just get, it's part of the job. You just get to do it, and that's all.
So, and that's good, I guess, that it becomes professional and not personal.
Correct.
Right. Okay. Well, we're going to be back in just a moment, and we're going to talk about something called a Hercules missile, which was as formidable as it sounds.
Military Memoirs is produced by the United Bank Center for Military and Veteran Studies at Coastal Carolina University and is made possible in part by the Lieutenant Tab Stogner Horry County Veterans Oral History Project, which is named in honor of the late H. Otis Tab Stogner, Jr., a World War II veteran of the United States Army. The project records and preserves oral history with Horry County veterans.
They're all around us. They're the men and women who served in our nation's armed forces. In good times and bad, they've been willing to stand in harm's way to preserve, protect, and defend the legacy of freedom we enjoy as Americans. All of them gave some, and some of them gave all. We owe them a lot. So the next time you see an American veteran, say thank you for all of us.
The United Bank Center for Military and Veteran Studies preserves oral history from American veterans of all service branches, including the U.S. Coast Guard. The Hack Mintz U.S. Coast Guard Oral History Project is named in honor of the late Henry Hack Mintz, a longtime resident of Myrtle Beach who held 3 U.S. Coast Guard commands. The Hack Mintz U.S. Coast Guard Oral History Project, a key component of the United Bank Center for Military and Veteran Studies.
Hello and welcome back to Military Memoirs. We're talking to Mr. Roland Morin, who was a radar operator for the Army and Air Force National Guard during the Cold War at a missile site in the Northeast.
Correct.
In Rhode Island.
Yes.
So you transitioned from the Army to the Air Force. Now, how did that happen?
Well, I had a break in service, and I had been taught. The reason I had the break in service is they started sending us away from home. The meetings were being like 40 miles away, 30, 40 miles away, and I didn't want to make the transition once some of the meetings were almost once a week. Not like what they tell you once a month. Some of them were real close together, and I didn't want to do the travel time, so I left. And to be truthful with you, I missed it. So somebody that I had worked with previously had got in touch with me and told me that the Air Guard was getting ready to go to Panama. And if I was to join, and of course he was trying to recruit me, if I was to go back in, that we could go, I'd probably be able to go. So it sounded good, so I went back. And they were looking for, for people at the time.
Did you go to Panama?
I went to Panama, yes, I did go to Panama. I also, for signing back up, I got an increase in rank. I went from E4 to E5. And
so you were a master sergeant.
I ended up a master sergeant.
You ended up a master sergeant in the
Air
National Guard,
yes.
Air Force National Guard.
Yes.
So you had been previously, all these years, working with in the Army National Guard at an Ajax missile
Correct.
System at a battery.
Yes.
And then run by the Army. So then the Air Force wound up with the primary responsibility of the air defense.
Correct.
And also there was an upgrade in weaponry.
Yes.
So you went from an Ajax missile to the Hercules missile.
In the Army.
Yeah, still in the Army.
Still in the Army, yes.
Okay. Now, when you went back in the Air Force, and you were also a radar operator.
Yes.
For the Air Force. So was it the Hercules that you were dealing with there?
No, the Hercules missile by then was getting phased out.
Okay. Well, let's talk about this Hercules for a moment. Now, this was a upgrade from the Ajax.
Yes.
And this thing was 41 feet long.
Correct.
Weighed 10,000 pounds. And this had a range of 75 miles, which is not far compared to an intercontinental ballistic missile, an ICBM, but this was the first air defense at the time, so they didn't need to go far. They were trying to shoot down any threat that was coming to the shores.
Correct.
Right? So, but this thing could travel 2,700 miles an hour. So, I mean, you could cover 75 miles.
No time at all.
Right. And it also carried a conventional warhead, but also could carry
It was capable of carrying.
a nuclear warhead.
Warhead.
Right, okay. So when you saw this whole transition from conventional to nuclear, kind of a sobering thought, I guess, right?
Yes, it was.
Yeah. So in the Air Force then, after the Hercules, what were you dealing with?
Basically, then we were dealing with the aircraft. They were handing them off from one radar site to another radar site, and
Okay, so you would see
more in line like an air traffic controller.
right, but you were still in Rhode Island.
Still in Rhode
All
Island.
right, so you're there on the northeast, on the east coast. So you're the first line of defense still.
Yes.
So you see this something coming in, you can't quite identify it, so then you may end up handing it off to someone else. And they're looking at something.
Exactly.
And by then, the ICBMs were being deployed.
Correct.
Right. So these were the intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Missiles.
Both sides had them, the Soviet Union and the United States. And the way I understand they worked is these things, if they were ever used, would be fired and they would come up over the North Pole into the United States. And if we retaliated, it'd be vice versa. Mm-hmm. And then those bases were scattered, from like Arkansas to Montana. But they had to be in deep silos.
Yes.
Because they were big. These were like
Exactly.
moon rockets.
Yes.
Okay. So all this is changing, but it's still the Cold War. Now, were you working full time there, or working guard weekends?
I was only working guard weekends then.
So how did you make that transition from knowing that you were involved in what could be really a global nuclear war, potentially, could just grow to that, and then you're on guard and you're doing that on the weekend, then you go back to your regular civilian job? Wasn't that kind of a challenging transition?
No, I didn't find it challenging. You know,
So just business as usual.
Keep them separate. Exactly.
Yeah. So that's how you had to do it.
Yes.
See, when you were working your civilian job, you're not even thinking about that, pretty much. And then all of a sudden you just kind of change your
attitude.
your mental state, and now all of a sudden you're in the military again, and you're guarding first line of defense against a horrible nuclear apocalypse or something. And you could just do that.
Yeah.
You could just make that shift. Okay. Well, in your time there in the Air Force and the National Guard, in this long scope, because you were there like 4 decades, you were there 42 years. So you saw this whole development of defense systems and all that growing in a way that really very few people could see this. So when you look back at that now, what do you think about the role that you played in this?
Well, to be truthful with you, it was just a job. It was something that I went into. It was, at the beginning, it was a living. Afterwards, it was something that I wanted to do. It had to be done. And that's about all that I can say.
But eventually, there where you were in Rhode Island and in the surrounding areas, because you had these first defense Nike, Ajax, and Hercules missiles outside of New York City and outside of Philadelphia and Chicago and really around the country, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So when in all of that going on, there was this official policy called MAD, Mutual Assured Destruction Deterrent. And the idea, as I understand it, was that neither side, none of the players wanted to start a nuclear war because they realized that they could be destroyed too. And so there was this mutual assurance that there would be gigantic destruction that kept people from doing that, and it was a deterrent. And that lasted, and has lasted, I guess, for more than a half a century. So do you feel like it was, I mean, we're all here, so I guess it was effective.
Well, that's for sure. And we still have to stay alert, because it still could happen.
Yeah, and actually more quickly.
Yes.
Because the whole transition in the weaponry
It's changed.
developed, right. So when you were in high school, did you ever even conceive that you might be working in such a way?
No, I had no idea. It's just something that I fell into and continued doing it. Once I started doing it, just kept doing it.
What did you find to be the difference in the changes over time from, let's say, from the Army National Guard to the Air Force National Guard? Not many people served in both of those, and you did. So when you look back at that, what were the differences that you saw there?
Well, one of the major differences that the Air Guard was easier to work in, but more challenging. More challenging.
In what way?
There's more fields to go in, more, you know, and to look at. And there was more opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Well, and along the way, as you did this for 40 years, did you kind of gain some kind of perspective on this whole Cold War thing?
Mm.
You saw how it changed over time?
How it changed over time, yes.
Yeah, well, how do you feel, from your perspective there, how did it change?
Personally, I think that people started realizing what could happen and started, to put in simple words, using their heads more.
Right. Now, you were there through 1998. You were serving, and that included finally the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Yes.
And the rise of what was left was Russia. And then, so at that time, when all that happened and you were working in that, what was the general mood and thought about all of that? I mean, for years, for decades, the Soviet Union had been the primary potential opponent.
Correct.
And now, in 89, 88, 89, 90, it starts disintegrating under the Reagan administration. So what were the thoughts inside all of this as this kind of came a thought? I mean, I presume that it was viewed as a good thing, but it also had to be a very tense time.
You know, I had never given it that much thought, to be truthful.
Mm-hmm. But in all of that time, how did you manage to kind of shake the knowledge that, or deal with the knowledge that you were kind of at the heart of this whole defense system thing? And that's a big deal.
It is a big deal now, but when you're there and you're doing it, it's just an everyday job.
Is that an attitude of youth, you think?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, really.
Yeah, because I've heard so many of you veterans say, you're holding a lot of responsibility, or you're in dangerous positions, that it doesn't really, you don't really think about it that way. And of course, you're generally young people at the time.
Yes.
So I guess that's helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So after your duty there in Rhode Island, and you finally, after 42 years, did your service to your country, and you're out of the Guard, and then eventually you find yourself, like so many people, retiring in the Myrtle Beach area and living here now.
That's right.
Yeah. So I want to thank you for coming in and sharing your time with us and sharing your insights into this, what really was a remarkable period. So when you look back at it from this perspective and you think about your service time, is this something that's gratifying to you?
Yes, it is. Yeah, I'm not sorry that I did it. I would probably do it again if I had to. Yes.
Well, we appreciate you doing it all for us. So thank you for your service.
Okay, thank you.
And we want to thank you, too, for joining us for Military Memoirs.
The preceding program is made possible by the generous support of these sponsors: Conway Ford, dedicated to serving our communities and our veterans in Horry, Georgetown, and Marion counties. By PGBA, the health claims processor for the American Armed Forces, serving those who serve us. And by United Bank, with full-service banking for our community and our veterans from convenient locations.